The first time I met Ramona Sen, almost 7 years ago, she seemed to me not just like a lady on a horse, but a lady on a rather high horse. For in her very first conversation, she took me through all the unpronounceable cheese and chocolate she ate in Paris at a time when I was still contemplating my next trip to Puri.
Okay. I just want to say that what I was avoiding was a conversation on Messi and football. So I dove right into what I know best, which is food.
To be fair to her, my first impression of her was about as misleading as the first impressions of many of the multi-layered characters in her novels. Over the years though, as I have gotten to know Ramona Sen, one extravagant meal at a time, I have realized that she is the coolest colleague, the most no-nonsense confidant, as well as the finest food mentor one can ask for. And now she has gone ahead and written a novel, a book that is as relatable as it is revelatory, a standard bearer of what lucid and layered fiction should read like. I think to begin the conversation, perhaps it is fitting that we address the most curious element of the title, which is the lady on the horse. Now, for those of you who don't yet know the story or are yet to read the book, the lady on the horse in the book is a woman called Priti Lota, who rides in and out of Lahiri Bari, which is where most of the story is set. She rides in and out of Lahiri Bari on a magnificent horse at odd hours of the night. But the lady on the horse in real life is actually your great-grandmother from Chittagong. Unpack that for us.
Thanks, Priyam. First of all, ungrateful whippersnapper comes to me for food recommendations all the time, so I'm going to lead him to cabbage sushi next. But yes, back to the book. It is called The Lady on the Horse, and large parts of the historical bits of this novel was written during our first lockdown, which was in 2020. And my mother was looking through these family albums, and out falls the photograph of a lady on a horse. And it's taken in Chittagong. I'm not sure of the year, but she looked fairly young. And she's riding side saddle, she's wearing a skirt, and it's all very curious. The imagery of that stayed with me. I wove it into the book, and my great-grandmother, Tusharala Kasturi, didn't go on, of course, to lead the same life that Priti Lota did. Priti Lota's actions, as you will find out, were very different, but there was something about that imagery that stood out with me. A lot of people come and go, but the photograph of the lady on the horse makes it down 5 generations.
Did you ever try to replicate that photograph yourself?
Priyam, thanks.
Okay. Come back to the book. Now, once you read the book, you'll realize that the story is spread across 5 generations, as you said, and a timeline of 122 years. And this is a narrative that keeps going back and forth between these years, between centuries. What I want to know from you is that when you were writing the story, when you were plotting it, did you do it chronologically and then rearrange the sections, or did you also go back and forth in your mind? Take us through that process.
I definitely didn't write it chronologically, because when I started writing it, it was only the story of inequality between these 2 girls growing up in present times, in the sense that my childhood, so the early 2000s, etc. And it was a story of inequality only between them, because I've often wondered what it's like for the people who share our spaces. And there are these 2 girls who were the same age. One is the daughter of the house and the other one is the maid's daughter. They lead similar lives, but they also lead really different lives. And then sometime while I was writing it, I started exploring why we do what we do, and that took me back to the generation before that. Why is the mother a certain kind of hard? Why is the grandfather a certain kind of deviant? And then when you start exploring that, and then you start, what did the ancestors do to this little boy to make him such an aberrant adult? And then I had to cap it off in 1900 because that was just getting out of control. And so that's how I went back and I plotted 5 generations. And no, it wasn't chronological at all. I think I just wrote whichever character came to me and then I stitched it together like patchwork.
Wonderful. Before we move on with the questions, would you like to read an excerpt to give the audience a taste?
Oh. So this particular excerpt is the character Hemanta Lahiri, and this is set in the 1960s in Calcutta. Hemanta Lahiri is a young man who's just moved from North Calcutta to a house in South Calcutta, and he's taken up employment at a little magazine run by a young Englishman called Julian Maitland in what was still known as Shahepara then. The magazine is called The Little Nugget because it's my tribute to P.G. Wodehouse. Once Hemanta was able to prove that he was as informed about the use of the Oxford comma as he was with the correct lacing of Oxford shoes, he found himself in just the kind of office he had only dreamed of, which was a relief since Devananda Jethu, who is his uncle, had begun to talk about him being inducted into Lahiri and Sons, the coveted men's tailoring shop in the city. This made him nervous. While he was sure he preferred the wing-tipped collar over the spread, he had no interest in discussing the ideal width of trouser pleats with strange men. Unlike his grandfather, Hem did not think tailoring was a noble profession. He agreed, though, that sartorial elegance was a noble pursuit, and was grateful for the trilby that the boys at the shop had stitched for his 18th birthday. One did have to make a distinction between being the dresser and the dressee. Coming into adulthood in post-independence India, not an event that the Lahiris had prepared for, had been difficult for Hemanta, who was unable to share all the angst about poverty and landlessness. Unlike the politically motivated sorts he'd gone to college with, who were vociferous about their idealistic notions, Hem didn't think he could actually be of use to the displaced millions who had staggered across the border into jute and bamboo camps. He could hardly stand to look at them. But all the disruption proved to be a useful story for someone who wanted to appear to be stoic about displacement, especially since he decided that he was just going to have to lose his grandparents to the partition and sacrifice his parents to the trauma of the journey from Dhaka. It was a narrative he had been quick to weave after he moved into a house in the infinitely less crowded part of town. He was marveling at how easy the whole process of cutting the Lahiris of North Calcutta out of his life was turning to be when he was caught off guard by a casual question by Maitland one day. "You have a frightfully good tailor." "Lahiri and Sons in Newmarket," replied Hem absently. "I know that place. Relatives of yours?" The question was innocent enough, anyone might have wondered really, and yet he had not foreseen it. Hem felt blood rise to his ears. "No." "Oh, all right. I was told that one of the chaps who had helped start it was known to my grandfather. They discovered later he was masquerading as a Khansama in their house." Hem looked up coldly. "My grandfather wasn't fraternizing with Khansamas. He was a barrister, murdered when his family was moving from Dhaka to Calcutta in 1947. I'm told there were men who burst in and put their spears right through him." Julian Maitland looked paler than usual, evidently wishing he hadn't brought up the subject. "I'm sorry, old chap," he mumbled. "It's all right, but I think I'll go for a walk," said Hem, standing up and striding towards the hat stand, reaching for his brown trilby, which he had taken to wearing to work almost every day, because he liked to be able to pass off as an Englishman, if only to watch pedestrians shuffle unconsciously to make way for him. Even now, even in 1962, the Sahibs might be gone, but the era of the brown Sahib was here. Kowtowing to fair-skinned, English-speaking men of breeding was a habit that was going to take some generations to shirk, which is why Hemanta Lahiri knew he had made the right decision to remain in Calcutta while his brothers had escaped to England.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I think Hemanta Lahiri is a great example of a character, as are many other characters in the novel, that your family ultimately shapes your fate. You become who you are mostly because of your family, sometimes in spite of it. And let's talk about the Lahiris for a moment. I hope no Lahiris in the audience before what I'm going to say. So, one of the central questions in the book is that what does it exactly mean to be a Lahiri? And a facile way of answering it, having read the book myself, is that to be a Lahiri is to run away from home, to do at least one thing in life you wish you had never done, to be privy to at least one secret in life you wish you had never known. But on a deeper, substantial level, what exactly does it mean to be a Lahiri in terms of identity, perhaps even ideology?
So that was a pithy way to put it, and I would say that all the Lahiris in the book who wanted to act like Lahiris had no deeper understanding or deeper motivations in life. But because they were particularly attached to projecting a certain image of themselves and strip away Lahiri from the name, I think most of us, a lot of us, are attached to a certain image that we do project. But in the book, some people obviously are attached to less than others. Why is that? Because with the Lahiris, if you strip away the accoutrements of wealth and success and all the other superficial markers of success that they were attached to, then what are you really left with? And that's where I've tried to explore the battle of the classes and of course the caste, because the fact that I chose the surname Lahiri for a reason. They are upper caste, and the reason that they can behave the way they did was because they belonged to the caste that they did and could project a certain lifestyle by keeping those less fortunate under their will and power all the time.
I must say, I was very pleasantly surprised by all the political commentary that you wove into the book, considering every time there's a political conversation in office, you go to the next room. But
I'm watching.
Absolutely. Now, before we go into the story further, I'd like to ask you, how long did it take for you to actually write this book? And while you were writing this, what were the stuff you were reading? What were the books that gave you company? More importantly, what was the food that gave you company during that time?
So Sumita didn't give me leave for 4 years like I wanted to write the book. So I started writing in 2018, and then there were these long phases where I wasn't writing, of course, because again Sumita. But I wrote a chunk of it during the pandemic and lots of it during the lockdown. And I think I wrote the major meat of the history during the pandemic for sure. The books that I read, my research was very, I think it was pointed. It's not that I was reading a lot of historical books and then I got the idea. I was like, well, I want to write the story, so what are the details that I can fill in? So my research was very pinpointed. There was a particular book that helped me a lot, which was called Stormy Decades. And there's a lot of literature online on JSTOR and all of that. And some of the particularly interesting books were written by the women of the Raj, English women who wrote about all their struggles and what adjusting to life in India was like then. And I think I wove some of those anecdotes into the book, and the tales, and the women actually had to tie mosquito bags under their pillowcases under their dresses because they were attacked by mosquitoes and they just weren't used to it. So that was part of their styling, that they put on a dress and they tied pillowcases around their knees. And then of course goings on with the Khansamas and just all the Indian help that they had, and picking up the language, some not picking up the language. So that was the interesting bit. What was I eating during lockdown? Not much. I know that there was a segment of people really eating during the lockdown, but my life came to a standstill because I've written about this before, but my mother believes in functional food. And she kept my inspiration going with kumro shetto, pepe shetto. Okay, I baked some cake myself, so some vanilla sponge. So, and then there's the rest of the world baking bread and and that's how they're spending lockdown, and I was writing with kumro shetto on the side. So that was not fun. But then I made up for it after lockdown.
Yeah,
when I wrote the
saw
water
that.
parts.
I think one of my favorite aspects of the book is the sheer suppleness of the words. To borrow from gastronomy, which is of course a very favorite subject of ours, even when the tension in the plot seems to be as heavy as a beef Wellington, the words and the language feel as light as a soup. So how did you manage to strike that balance between substance and style?
First of all, how did you manage to come up with that metaphor? Only by hanging out with the lady on the high horse.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
But no, I think, well, this I wasn't trying to do. I think my natural voice is light. I know that subjects are heavier in this book, but my natural voice it leans towards the comedy, I think. One of the reasons being I spent the ages of 14 to 18 primarily reading every single P.G. Wodehouse that I could get my hands on. And I think that sort of like seeped into my narrative voice. I've used this before in my other books only to write humor. And I've used the humor here to highlight the deeper parts of life or the darker parts of life. And I think the other point is that my mother's always giving me a reality check. So there was this, I think one of the first essay competitions that I had won in school was an interfest thing, and Jacko synthesis. It was a big deal because James was a cool school when we were there. And I came home and told my mom, I won the inter-school essay writing competition. And she said, really? How? And I was like, well, because I was good, but there's my mother always keep giving me a reality check. So I don't take myself seriously. And that, I suppose, comes out in the narrative voice.
Absolutely. I think it would be time to do a small enactment.
Oh, yes. So this is 1900, and the first generation Lahiri, who is called D.N. Lahiri, has just got married. And he's in Calcutta with his friend who, Anglo-Indian, called Matthew Sebastian, but back then they were called Eurasians. And they're just discussing life. Deependranath Lahiri was deep in the perusal of the sort of book that could, in 100 years, be taken off a shelf labelled self-help. But in 1900, it was considered just the opposite. The esteemed rulers were afraid that this was exactly the sort of literature that would make native boys already suffering from the polluted environment of their homes run amok. The Calcutta Phrenological Institute certainly makes all its profits from you misguided Indians, drawled Matthew Sebastian from his position by the window, taking a slow drag from his cigarette and puffing right into the room. Sebastian and company had gone to surreptitious lengths to buy the book, wrapping up their ribald joke in a discreet newspaper to be presented covertly for the occasion of their friend's wedding.
You're Indian too?
Not entirely. I haven't the foggiest who my father is. I'm not even sure my mother wants me. I'm not white enough for the English or black enough for you babus.
I'm not a babu yet.
But you will be?
I have my eyes set on babuhood, yes.
Then let me tell you what that damn book won't. What every young man should know about marriage. The book went flying across the room, landing neatly on a pile of unwashed dhotis in the corner. Rule number 1. Don't marry a girl who reads and has her own ideas. It will backfire on you.
I already did. And I'll have you know that she is a bright young thing, all ready to fall in with my plans.
Rule number 2. Slap her behind a parda.
Things are changing, Mama.
Maybe for your unborn children, but you, my friend, will be a slave forever, and your wife will be, well, what's worse than being a slave?
A woman?
Does she know, this wife of yours,
No what?
that you're not in fact going to college?
I told her. She took the news hurriedly and we debated the merits of college.
What are the merits of college?
There are none. I'll only get so far, wading around the outer edge of the Indian civil service.
Like you're even going to get there. Who do you think you are, Shoktindranath Tagore?
Exactly why I have a plan.
Oh, what plan?
Listen, do you want to make some money?
Who doesn't?
No, really. Aren't you saving to go home next month?
The perpetually scowling but good-natured Sebastian grinned at the irony of the word home. I think I might get off to Jamaica. Those fellows might like me more.
Fine, you do that. But until then, are you up for some fun?
Fun that pays money?
More money than dragging your feet to college.
Alright. What do you have?
DM brought out a bag and upturned a heap of white on the floor. Sebastian picked up a long white robe in surprise. You are Abdul, I am Shahenshah, and we don't speak English or Bengali. We speak Hindustani. Do you understand me?
Do you understand you?
I happen to have heard that the Maitlands are looking for a cook and a khansama, having fired one for conducting an orgy in the kitchen and the other for being crude.
What I want to know is the one conducting the kitchen orgy was not in fact the one being crude?
D.N. Lahiri had put on his own white robe and was now tying a maroon kamarband around it. Apparently not. The cook, being entertained by two young boys in his quarters, had no intention of being crude. But when the goings-on were brought to the notice of Mrs. Maitland, she cried out, rightfully horrified, "How could he?" To which the khansama replied, "With jelly named Sahib." So now you see why they weren't fired?
Sebastian was yowling.
Anyway, the Maitlands are to host a dinner. The invitations have been sent out and they are desperate. Do you know what I'm getting at, young Sebastian?
By Jove, you'll be a babu yet. You'll be better than a babu. You'll be the king of all babus. He was too busy sliding into his new costume to see the glimmer in Dian Dahiri's eyes. So that was a true incident. That actually happened in the kitchens of the Raj.
It's prefaced with something one of my favorite writers, Oscar Wilde, had said, which is, everything in this world is about sex, except sex, which is about power. Now, there's a fair amount of sex in this book, relevant sex, I might add. But of course, a story about the Lahiris, a family as well endowed, ought to also be about power. So, how did you see the relationship between power and sex, especially when it came to the several romantic equations in the story?
Or not romantic. Yes, trust Oscar Wilde to come up with that. So in this case, I think sex was used as power certainly by people who wanted to establish dominance in a certain way or were using it for a certain reason. Then for other people, it was about being desired, something that they had not yet felt until that moment. And a lot of the sex was for, I would say, it's about the exploration of the self. There's something about the sexual experience itself where you discover yourself in a way that you wouldn't have had if that moment hadn't happened. But also, it implies that women and brides, young brides of a certain era, did not know what to expect. So it explores that. And it explores that if children are exposed to certain incidents and certain visuals, then they're very likely to turn out to be aberrant individuals or they grow up to be deviants. And since my novel is all about exploring why we do what we do and what has brought us to this moment, I wove in that imagery. And yes, it's not sex for sex's sake, yes. And now you made me say sex too many times in the room with my boss and my mother in the same room, so change the topic.
I was going to suggest you read out another of those portions where...
No.
Never. Okay, moving on, let's talk a little bit about the characters in the book and especially the female characters, because for me, having read the book, I felt that most of the female characters were jostling between a sense of belonging and a sense of betrayal. This applied as much to Pritilata, who is of course the lady on the horse, but it also applies to her great-great-granddaughter known as Pixie or Priyadarshini in the story. Again, my interpretation, but I felt that the women in the story seemed to be far more intriguing than the men. Was that a conscious narrative choice or simply a case of art imitating life?
So, a lot of my characters draw their primary personality traits from real people, even though not one person is based on exactly another person. And if that's art imitating life, then you tell me, where the gender stands. But of course, as a girl, I have more insight into the emotional lives of women. And I've been able to plumb their consciousness more deeply. But the men play a very important role. And yes, in the historical bits, it is as though the actions of the men influence the circumstances of the women directly. But as you come closer to modern times, and especially when you come to Pixie and Aisha, who are the protagonists in recent times, they are able to reclaim some of their individuality. And despite all the things that have been preordained for them, they have been able to act of their own volition and are not just victims of things that have been done to them. And that of course is a matter of time. And also, I think that is one of the things that the novel explores is. We are born into certain circumstances and that is preordained, but everything else that we do is a choice. If you want to take it really far, you can argue that the ways in which we act are also preordained, but I think the end of the novel especially suggests that no matter what has been preordained for us, how we act as adults is finally who we are really and the choices that we make.
Absolutely. Now, I've got one final question before we open it up to the audience. This stage, we already know that food and fiction are what fuel you. So, on that note, if you had to curate a lunch or dinner table at Siena with 5 of your favorite fictional characters, including one character from this book, who would they be and why?
Okay, so Chef Oroni, he's my real life anecdote, who is Aunt Dahlia's chef in the Woodhouse series for Bertie. I would definitely have the Duchess of Downton Abbey at the table, because what is a weekend, or like, what is a tasting menu? And I would include the friends of my childhood, because I think they have shaped my narrative voice and who I am today. I don't know whether all of you have read this book, but Frances Hodgson Burnett wrote Little Princess. Sarah Crewe was one of the most interesting girls of my youth. I would share a table with her. Matilda from Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl said that Matilda stopped doing magic because she was finally using all her brain, but I don't think Matilda stopped doing magic entirely. There was this historical romance by Georgette Heyer called These Old Shades, and Leonie was, I think, the spunkiest romance novel protagonist there ever was. So Leonie, and how many do we have? Oh, from my own book, I would choose this character called Nandini, mostly because she has a great character arc, but also the unwritten parts of Nandini, which don't feature in the book, and they're only in my manuscript, and they're really interesting. I would have Nandini at the lunch table. And oh yeah, no boys, no. There are, well, we have Jeeves. We have Jeeves in the background serving us with anecdote.
Okay, fair enough. I won't ask you what the menu would be, then we'll be here all evening. So I'll just open it up to the audience. So whoever's got a question, please raise your hand and we'll have the mic passed around.
If we say questions about food, they might ask.
Anybody, any questions? At the back?
Oh, the Lahiri's eat so well. In fact, there's a portion here where it takes place at the backdrop of the 1943 famine. And the Lahiri's are eating and eating like kings, and there are people dying outside saying, Handa, Handa. That imagery exists in the book, yes.
He's asking you because he's married to a Lahiri.
Oh! But maybe your great-grandfather wasn't pretending to be a Khansama.
No, but when I first went to Bombay, they asked me if I was related to Barbie. Which wasn't sort of something I was looking for correctly. But
well, I chose the surname because my dad actually had a tailor called Lahiri, and he was the picture of gentility. And I often wonder that, oh, this gentleman is just sitting here in this shabby shop, what happened? But this was when I was very young, so these things play in your mind.
And food also becomes one of those plot devices, right, in your story, where a lot of very important stuff happens around food, which you almost realize retrospectively.
So I don't know what to do with my characters unless they're eating. So there's a lot of food in the backdrop or the foreground, or what do I do with this person? Okay, let this happen at the dining table, let this happen at a restaurant. Yes, that happened with my first couple of books as well, which is more food related, but this is more the background.
Any other questions?
do people eat cake in the book?
No, but Pixie becomes a prolific home baker.
Your kind of cake.
Yeah, of course, she makes my kind of cake. Pixie becomes a home baker, and her mother's very upset because her mother was a mover and shaker, and Pixie is not, and only becomes a home baker. And the mother says, "Well, you're a disappointing child." But yes, Pixie, by the way, also had blue hair at some point in time. Shantae, hi.
I had a question. Did your ancestor, the photograph image, did she come into the novel? I haven't read it, so it's unfair to ask. But did she sort of feature in your book in any way?
No, not at all.
Do you know about her?
I know that her name was Tushabala Kastagi. I know that she was married to the Kastagis when they were in Chittagong, and then at 1947 during the partition, they moved to Calcutta. And Mom, do you want to say anything? Like, do you know anything about her?
Yes, I do.
My mom actually grew up in the house with her because this is my mother's grandmother, and she would know more about the very old lady then dying of cancer.
She was my mother-in-law. No,
Tusharbala Khastugi was your father's mother.
So, I knew about her to the extent that when we lived together, she led a very graceful life despite the fact that we lost everything which is more. But she had her own graceful style of living, wearing her chiffons and pearls and sitting down at the dining table. And in Chittagong, she actually had a horse, her own horse. They had their own stables, and she used to go riding in the horse every day. And they used to play tennis, and they had their swimming pool. My her husband was a barrister, and they had a very lavish lifestyle with a lot of khansamas. So that khansama image is there, and my grandmother she got that photograph from her family album, and she was on the horse, riding side saddle, wearing a gown with a hat, and looking like an English woman. So she led that lifestyle in those days. So that picture intrigued all of us. I don't know about Chittagong, and I've heard that this is the kind of life they used to lead. And in fact, my father used to. They didn't go to school. They had governesses. So that image, I think, remains with Ramona.
So it was all very colonial,
and very colonial.
and but the light. I mean, I've heard some of these stories and they're lighter, but everything took a dark turn in the book. So
It's got
yes.
nothing to do with
Yes.
what happens in the book.
I have to warn my relatives that no.
I would like to add one thing. I would like to thank Ramona for dedicating the book to me, because she has finally acknowledged that a book pays more dividends than a television set. Because throughout her school days, until she passed her higher secondary,
Didn't have a
I
TV.
did not allow a TV set at home.
Couldn't watch anything.
So she finally acknowledged that I didn't spare the book and spoil the child.
She spared some books though, like so if I was watching, if she got me reading Sweet Valley in the library, then she said, "Iraqi, watch. This is not books to be read." So yeah.
I have a question. So process-wise, when you started writing the book, did you know where it would end up, or was it more of a phase of discovery that happened as you wrote and I'm guessing rewrote?
Yeah, no, good question, because I had no clue where this book was going. And often actually I've discovered that my characters and my plot write itself. I do this thing called free writing, where before I start typing, I take a diary just to flesh out my characters. And I think that they're going to do certain things and be a certain way. But once you're free writing, which you do without thinking, you just start writing, and then the characters start writing themselves, and then they take on a certain persona that you hadn't planned for. And because many characters continue to do that, then the plot also forms itself around those characters. I had no clue actually where this book was going, and because I came across this thing called free writing only while I was writing the book. I had written large chunks of it, wasn't working. Then I did the free writing, then I did the new plot, and then I rewrote chunks of that. So yes, I think even the prologue I think was in the middle of the book, and then we moved it up, and yeah,
Quite a process.
quite.
So did it slip into the ending easily, or did you have to?
I knew how it was going to. I knew how it was going to end, and but I had to get it there. Yes. Some portions I had to work, and some portions I knew how it was going to work out. Like there was this one character where I didn't know what to do with her, and some, as you know, I literally bump off people.
Where did the top photo come from? I know it's Shutterstock, but why this photograph?
So the one is because they're two girls. A lot of the thing is the inequality between the two girls. So there are two children playing there. because publishers ask you for references, one of my references was Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend, because that also plays out with two girls. And I think that they managed to capture very well in that particular. So they've got the two girls, but also my story isn't just about the two girls, and it also has a lot of Calcutta. So the bottom picture is a old North Calcutta house. Just yeah.
So having sat through a fair few interviews with you where you believe people feel you, how much of that happened during the writing of this?
No one fed me.
What a lie!
Oh my god, no one knew that I was writing so much. No one fed me. My mother, you already know what she was feeding
No,
me.
it's not about the food. I mean, the interview. I mean, the research. Was it all book or
Research was all book. All book, yes. No, it wasn't so much about talking to people. Also because the research that I needed was in the 1900s, and well, they're not alive anymore. But no, yes, I wasn't talking to real people and say, which I've been doing lately before another book, and I've said, like, please talk to me about my food book, and this means that you can only cook for me because that's how I really get the flavor. Looking at you, then.
Can you say something about Calcutta? One of your writing is
Oh,
based in the city.
yes, actually, I've lived in Delhi for 4 years, but no city has really felt to me the way Calcutta feels to me. I feel very much a part of this city. I've traveled to Bombay fairly frequently, and I've lived in Delhi for a bit. But there's something about the ethos of Calcutta which I feel very much at home here. I feel very much at home. And I think most of my friends, other than Urvashi, they're not in Calcutta anymore. Everyone's left, and I know they have found themselves in other cities. But I have to say that even though I did masters and my first job was in Delhi, I think I came to myself only after I moved back to Calcutta, and I came into my adulthood in Calcutta. That has a lot to do with what I feel about the city. And one might argue that I came to it because Sumita put me on the food beat in T2, and that might have had something to do with how I found myself or my appetite. But no, jokes apart, I think this city has really, there's a pulse to it which I feel.
It's not about the book because I haven't read it. I'm really sorry to deliver it.
Well, one, I'm a decade older than when I wrote Creme. Two, this feels like my first book in many ways because it's not that I discovered my style, but I think this is what I always wanted to write. Creme Brulee, interestingly, was a book that was commissioned from me. There was a literary agent who wanted to sell a particular kind of romance novel and liked my voice of humor and said, can we do humor and romance? And I was 23 and I was really kicked that a literary agent was asking me to write a book. So I wrote Creme Brulee. Humor does come naturally to me when I'm writing. So Creme Brulee wasn't hard to write, but this has something else to it. And in many ways, this does feel like my first book like that.
Is there anyone here who's read Creme Brulee?
Yeah, my mom. I don't know whether you've read Creme Brulee.
Then, Auntie, can you tell us something about the differences that you see in your novels writing 10 years apart?
Not really. But the stories are very different. But somehow, as she said, even though the second book, this current book, has a serious story, the way she portrays it, the language and her expressions, it has a light touch to it. It makes it enjoyable when you're reading something which is sad. The story is maybe a little depressing at times, but the way it's written makes you laugh, makes you smile. So it's a very contrasting kind of image which you get, which you enjoy. Sometimes it's like a chill also because things that happen in the story, you want to know what exactly is going to happen to these characters.
My mother was making wild guesses about what was going to happen to the characters every morning, and she said,
will happen to them. It makes you turn the pages. But her style of writing is more or less the same as Glenburn. there is a light-hearted feel about it, even when the particular description is actually heavy. So it's difficult to explain because it's so contrasting the way it's described and what actually happens. I think that is quite unique.
Any more questions? Last question. We can maybe take one more question if there's one. How easy or difficult was it to shut out the pandemic while writing during the pandemic?
I'll sound awful as I say this, but it was very easy to shut out the pandemic. Jodhpur Park became a dead para. There was no movement at all. Now, if I sit down to write, there will be thalagari, there will be honking, there will be chokji, and there will be hall and march and all of that. But in the pandemic, it was dead. So it was so quiet. It was really easy to concentrate and write. I know even without the fuel of good food, but I realized that I could concentrate and work for long hours, and maybe I was slacking off a little bit, so I could work longer and harder by not going to office. So, yes, office is bad for art.